The late autumn evening settled in as I sat on my back porch, nursing a cup of coffee. Sarah's laughter drifted through the open window behind me, mixing with the sounds of our daughters playing board games inside. The familiar warmth spread through my chest, not from the coffee, but from the simple joy of having them all here. 3 months into dating Sarah, and these Friday family dinners had become our tradition. Sophie, my youngest, had taken to Sarah immediately. The two of them shared a love for terrible puns that kept our dinner table alive with groans and giggles. I watched the steam rise from my cup, remembering how Sarah and I first met at the local hardware store. She'd been looking for specific bathroom modifications, and I'd overheard her struggling to explain what she needed to a clueless employee. My years in construction kicked in, and I stepped in to help. We ended up talking for hours in the store's cafe. "Dad," Sophie called from inside. "Sarah's teaching us that card game you hate." "Oh no, not spoons again," I called back, but couldn't help smiling. Sarah had this way of bringing life into our home, filling spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. Later that night, after the girls went to bed, Sarah and I settled on the porch swing. The night air carried a hint of winter, and she tucked herself closer against my side. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from understanding each other's quiet moments. "I found some interesting property listings today," she said, pulling out her phone. "This one's got potential for modifications when I need them." I squeezed her shoulder gently. Sarah's openness about her condition had taken time, but now she shared her fears and hopes freely. She showed me pictures of a beautiful piece of land just outside town, perfect for building from scratch. Wide doorways, smooth transitions between rooms. I started listing, already seeing the possibilities. We could design it exactly how we need it. "We?" Sarah looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "Yeah, we. I've been thinking." I took a deep breath. "I want to build our forever home. Something that works for all of us, where Sophie can have her art studio, Emily can have her reading nook, and you'll never have to worry about accessibility." Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers intertwining with my calloused ones. Time seemed to slow as she traced the old scars on my knuckles, marks from years of construction work. "Tell me more about this dream house of ours," she whispered. We talked for hours, sharing visions of open spaces and cozy corners, of a wraparound porch and a garden where the girls could plant vegetables. Sarah spoke about her fears of losing mobility, and I shared memories of losing Claire, my late wife. Sarah had been diagnosed with a neurological disease that would eventually put her in a wheelchair. As the night grew deeper, our conversation drifted to growing old together. Sarah spoke of her worries about dependency, and I found myself opening up about my own fears of loss. But somehow, sharing these vulnerable parts of ourselves made them feel less daunting. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, her head resting on my shoulder. "I stopped making long-term plans when I got my diagnosis. But here I am, planning a whole future with you." The simple truth of her words hit home. I too had stopped looking too far ahead after Claire died, focused only on raising Sophie and getting through each day. Now here we were, dreaming together, planning a home that would shelter all our hopes and fears. I watch Emily and Sophie sprawled on the living room floor, textbooks open but mostly forgotten as they giggle over something on Emily's phone. The sight warms my heart. In just a few months they've developed that bond that usually takes years. Emily looks up at me. "Mr. Michael, can Sophie stay for dinner again?" I glance at Sarah, who's reviewing the latest drawings for our new house. The plans show wide doorways, smooth transitions between rooms, and a specially designed master bathroom. Every detail carefully thought out for her needs. "You know you can just call me Michael," I tell Emily with a smile. Sarah catches my eye, her expression softening. Later that night, after the girls have gone upstairs, she opens up to me in a way she never has before. "Sometimes I wake up terrified," she whispers, her hand trembling slightly in mine. "Not just about the physical stuff, but about facing it all alone." I pull her closer. "You're not alone anymore. You've got me, the girls, all of us." The next morning, I make some calls to my crew. Over the next few weeks, we transformed Sarah's house, widening doorways, installing support rails, upgrading the bathroom. Every evening after work, I'm there with my tools, pouring not just money but my heart into making a home safer. $30,000 is a big chunk of my business capital, but seeing Sarah's relief as each improvement goes in makes it worth every penny. The property value is climbing too. When we sell, we'll have a good foundation for building our forever home. "You didn't have to do all this," Sarah says one evening, watching me install the last of the kitchen modifications. But I did. Because this isn't just about home improvements or property values. It's about showing Sarah that she can count on me, that we're in this together. That's worth more than any amount of money. The nausea hit me again during breakfast. I barely made it to the bathroom, gripping the sink as my stomach turned inside out. Sophie's worried voice called through the door, but I waved her off with a weak "I'm fine, sweetie." The metallic taste in my mouth was becoming familiar now. When I looked down, specks of red swirled in the sink. I'd been ignoring these symptoms for weeks. The fatigue I blamed on long hours at work sites. The stomach pain I wrote off as stress from juggling the new house plans and Sarah's renovations. But seeing blood that I couldn't explain away. My phone buzzed. Sarah had cancelled our dinner plans again. Third time this month. Her texts were getting shorter, more distant. Swamped at work. Rain check. No emoji, no warmth. The Sarah who used to send me random messages throughout the day, sharing little moments of her life, felt increasingly out of reach. I made an appointment with my doctor the next morning. Sitting in that sterile exam room, describing my symptoms, the gravity of it all finally hit me. Blood tests, CT scans, a colonoscopy scheduled. The renovation project at her house sat half-finished. Tools I normally wielded with confidence felt heavier each day. Last weekend I had to stop midway through installing a support rail, my hands shaking too much to trust myself with the power drill. Sarah said she understood when I explained the delays. Her voice was kind, professional, the same tone she probably used with difficult clients at work. But I caught the worry in her eyes, saw how she flinched when I mentioned more tests. The walls I'd worked so hard to break down were slowly rising again. That night I stared at our house plans spread across my kitchen table. The carefully measured doorways, the adapted bathroom layout, all the little details we'd planned together. My vision blurred, and I realized it wasn't just from exhaustion this time. I sat in the sterile examination room, my hands gripping the edge of the paper-covered bed, as Dr. Martin pulled up the scan results on his computer. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything feel surreal. "I'm sorry, Michael. The tests show a malignant tumor in your stomach." The words hit me like a physical blow. My ears started ringing, and the room seemed to tilt sideways. All I could think about was Sophie, who'd already lost one parent, and Emily, who'd started calling me Dad just last week, and Sarah, God, Sarah. What's the prognosis?" My voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez went through treatment options, survival rates, and next steps, but it all blurred together. I nodded mechanically, clutching the folder of information he handed me. The drive home felt endless. I found Sarah in our half-finished kitchen, looking over some paint samples. When she saw my face, the swatches slipped from her fingers. The results came back. My voice shook as I forced the words out. "It's cancer. Stomach cancer." Sarah's face went blank, like a switch had been flipped. She stood perfectly still, her fingers pressed against the counter. I needed her to hold me, to tell me we'd fight this together. Instead, she gave a small nod, her eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "We'll get through this," she said quietly, but her arms stayed at her sides. The distance between us felt like miles. My chest tightened. After everything we'd been through, after all the promises we'd made about facing our health challenges together, her reaction cut deeper than the diagnosis itself. I recognized the look in her eyes, the same one she got when talking about her own condition. Fear, distance, withdrawal. In that moment, standing in our unfinished kitchen with cancer hanging between us like a storm cloud, I realized this might break more than just my health. The chemo hits like a sledgehammer every time. After each session, I drag myself home, collapsing into bed where the nausea and exhaustion consume me. Sophie tries to help, bringing me water and crackers, but I hate that she has to see me like this. She shouldn't have to take care of her dad. Sarah showed up for the first few treatments. She'd sit beside me during the infusions, hold my hand, bring magazines. But gradually, the empty chair beside me became more familiar than her presence. The excuses started rolling in, her symptoms were flaring up. Emily needed help with a school project, work deadlines loomed. I get it. I really do. Watching someone go through chemo isn't easy. But nights are the hardest, when the house feels too big and too quiet. I miss having her there, miss Emily's laughter mixing with Sophie's down the hall. Last week I brought up the idea of a dinner at her place. What if we sold one of our houses, combined our resources, moved in together? My voice was steadier than I felt. We could support each other, pool our medical expenses. It just makes sense. Sarah pushed food around her plate, not meeting my eyes. I don't know, Michael. It's a big step. I need more time to think about it. More time. That's all I seem to hear from her lately. More time to consider our future, more time before committing. But time isn't exactly on my side anymore. I watch her load the dishwasher. Her movements precise and measured, like she's trying to maintain control through sheer force of will. The distance between us grows with each passing day, and I'm too exhausted from fighting cancer to bridge it. I lay in bed trying to fight off another wave of nausea from today's chemo session. Sophie brought me crackers and ginger ale earlier, but I couldn't keep anything down. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah's name lit up the screen. My stomach dropped before I even read the message. Something in me already knew. I love you, but I can't see myself taking care of someone this sick in the long term. The words hit me like a physical blow. I read them again and again, each time feeling another piece of my heart crack. The same woman who'd shared dreams of our forever home, who I'd spent thousands renovating her house for, who'd opened up to me about her fears of being alone, she was leaving me because I got sick. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those nights I held her, promising I'd be there through her condition, making plans to support her, and now this. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The silence in my bedroom felt deafening. Claire's photo still sat on my dresser, and for the first time since her death, I truly felt that bone-deep loneliness again. I forced myself up, ignoring the dizziness and nausea. In my closet were a few things Sarah had left here, a sweater, some toiletries, a pair of earrings on my dresser. I grabbed an old shopping bag and started collecting them. Each item was another twist of the knife, but I kept going. Better to do it now, while the shock numbed the pain. I told myself I should understand, that not everyone can handle watching someone they love go through this, that I should forgive her for protecting herself. But underneath the rationalizations, anger started to simmer. After everything I'd done to show her she wouldn't face her illness alone, she couldn't do the same for me. I pulled up to Sarah's house, my truck loaded with boxes of her things, photos, clothes, the small decorative items she'd gradually brought into my home. The weight in my chest had nothing to do with the chemo. Each item I'd packed reminded me of a moment, a laugh, a promise we'd made. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her backyard as I carried the first box toward her porch. My muscles ached from the effort, but I wanted to do this right to maintain whatever dignity was left between us. No drama, no confrontation. Just return her belongings and close this chapter. That's when I saw them through the living room window. Sarah was on her couch with Mark, the guy she'd introduced as her old friend from college a few months back. The same man who'd sat at my dinner table, complimented my cooking, and discussed renovation plans for Sarah's bathroom like he actually cared. Their bodies were intertwined, her head tucked against his chest in that intimate way she used to rest against mine. The box nearly slipped from my hands. I remembered the night Mark first came over, how Sarah had insisted on inviting him, saying she wanted her two favorite guys to meet. We'd shared beers, talked about our jobs, our hopes. He'd even asked about my chemo treatments, seeming genuinely concerned. A cold realization washed over me. While I'd been fighting for my life, planning our future, I couldn't finish the thought. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd felt before, not just at Sarah's betrayal, but at the calculated deception of it all. They'd played me for a fool, and I'd been too caught up in my own illness, my own hopes, to see it. I set the box down silently, my hands shaking with anger rather than weakness for once. The rest of her things could stay in my truck. Let her come get them herself. The chemo left me weaker than before, but Sophie's constant presence kept me going. Between treatments, I threw myself into finishing the renovations on my own house, the ones I'd started before everything fell apart. The physical labor helped me forget, even if just for moments. One afternoon at the hardware store, I bumped into Linda. She introduced herself as Mark's ex, and my stomach dropped at the mention of his name. We got talking over coffee, and that's when the truth spilled out. Mark and Sarah had been seeing each other for months, she said, stirring her drink. Since last summer at least. Last summer. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. That was when Sarah and I were planning our future home together, when I was spending my savings making her house accessible. While I held her hand through doctor's appointments, believing we were building something real. Linda detailed how she discovered their affair, the texts, the secret meetings, the lies they both told. Each revelation twisted the knife deeper. Sarah hadn't just abandoned me when I got sick, she'd been living a double life the whole time. I sat there, coffee growing cold, as the full picture emerged. All those nights she was working late or meeting friends. The growing distance I'd attributed to her fears about my illness. The reluctance to combine our lives, despite all my efforts to accommodate her needs. The anger I'd been suppressing since seeing them together that day bubbled up fresh. Not just at the betrayal, but at my own blindness. I'd been so focused on being understanding, on supporting her through her condition, that I'd missed all the signs. I'd been nothing but a safety net. Someone to renovate her house and provide stability until a better option came along. The realization burned, but it also freed me. The guilt I'd carried about not being enough, about failing to support her properly, it all evaporated in the face of her calculated deception. Going through my business files today, trying to keep my mind off the nausea from chemo, I stumbled across the thick folder of invoices from Sarah's renovations. Each detailed receipt reminded me of the hours spent widening doorways, installing support rails, and upgrading her bathroom. The numbers jumped off the page: $47,000 in materials and labor, all fronted from my business capital. My hands shook as I read through the itemized lists. Every modification had been carefully planned for her condition, done with love and the promise of our future together. We'd agreed she'd pay me back when she eventually sold the house. Now that promise felt like ash in my mouth. I called Jim, my attorney, and laid out the situation. He listened patiently as I explained how I'd funded the entire project, how Sarah had acknowledged the debt in writing, and how she'd promised repayment. "File a mechanic's lien," Jim said without hesitation. "You did the work in good faith, documented everything properly. The law's on your side." I sat at my desk staring at the paperwork Jim had sent over. Part of me felt guilty about taking legal action, but then I remembered seeing her with Mark through that window. The memory of them together on that couch, in the very house I'd renovated, steeled my resolve. The lien paperwork wasn't complicated. Each invoice was meticulously detailed, a habit from years of running my own business that was now paying off. I signed the documents with a steady hand, knowing this would throw a wrench into any plans she had to sell the house without settling her debt to me. When Jim called to confirm the lien had been filed, I felt no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of justice. The renovations I'd done out of love would now serve as chains, binding her to her betrayal until she made things right. The lien on Sarah's house turned into a bigger nightmare than I expected. My attorney Jim kept me updated on the proceedings, and each update brought a mix of satisfaction and disgust. Sarah's attempts to sell the house kept falling through as potential buyers backed out once they discovered the lien. The fees and penalties stacked up like the medical bills on my kitchen counter. Finally, after months of legal back and forth, Sarah managed to sell the house. The lien ate up most of her equity. Karma had its own mathematics. Jim told me she walked away with barely 10 grand, not even enough for a decent down payment in this market. She had to move in with Emily, her daughter, in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman who'd abandoned me at my lowest point, now forced into dependency herself. Every time I drove past that apartment complex on my way to chemo, I felt a dark satisfaction knowing she was in there, probably sleeping on a pull-out couch, living with the instability she'd feared so much. I never reached out to her, never sent a message or made a call. The lien did all the talking for me. It wasn't about the money anymore, though getting paid back for those renovations helped ease the sting of her betrayal. It was about justice, about consequences. While I fought my battle with cancer, she was learning her own harsh lesson about loyalty and trust. The renovation work I'd done on her house, the wider doorways, the support rails, all those accessibility features I'd installed with such care, they'd ended up being the very thing that brought her down. Sometimes life has a way of turning your good deeds into someone else's punishment. I was enjoying my Saturday morning jog through Riverside Park when I spotted her. The sight of Sarah in a wheelchair knocked the wind out of me more than my 3-mile run. Her daughter Emily stood behind her, hands gripped tight on the handles, looking anywhere but at me. My feet carried me forward before my brain could process whether to turn on around. The crisp autumn air felt thick and heavy in my lungs. Sarah's eyes met mine. Those same eyes that once lit up when we talked about our future together. Now they were different, dimmer, weighted down with what looked like regret. "Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's good to see you." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Sarah." The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. Emily mumbled something about checking her phone and stepped away, leaving us alone on the paved trail. "You look well," Sarah said, fidgeting with the blanket across her lap. "I heard your treatment was successful." "Yes, been in remission for 6 months now." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful. I think about you sometimes, about our Friday dinners. Sophie must be getting so big now." My jaw tightened. Those memories didn't belong to her anymore. She is. Sarah's fingers twisted in the fabric of her blanket. "The house, your renovations, they've been helpful. More than I expected they would be." I didn't respond. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those accessibility features I'd installed out of love were now serving their intended purpose, just under very different circumstances than we'd planned. "Michael, I know I hurt you. I should get going," I cut her off, taking a step back. "My daughter's waiting for me at home." "Please," she reached out slightly, then let her hand fall back to her lap. "I just want you to know how sorry I am for everything." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who'd abandoned me during chemo, who'd been sleeping with Mark while I fought for my life, who'd taken my love, my trust, and my money without a second thought. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," I said, my voice cool and controlled. I walked past her wheelchair, my footsteps steady on the path. Behind me, I heard Emily's shoes on the pavement as she returned to her mother. I didn't look back. There was nothing left there for me to see. My phone buzzed while I was reviewing construction plans at my desk. Emily's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened. I hadn't heard from her since everything fell apart with Sarah. "Hi, Michael," her voice trembled slightly. "I was wondering if we could maybe meet up sometime." The familiar warmth I used to feel hearing her voice was replaced by a dull ache. Images of our Friday dinners flashed through my mind, Emily and Sophie sprawled on the living room floor, sharing headphones and laughing at videos. "I miss you and Sophie," she continued, her words careful and measured. "Mom's, well, things are different now. I just thought maybe we could grab lunch or something." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of my desk. Part of me wanted to say yes, to fall back into the comfortable role I'd played in her life. But I knew better now. Getting involved again would only lead to more pain for all of us. "Emily, I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I care about you, but I think it's best if we maintain some distance. What happened between your mom and me affected everyone, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go." The silence on the other end felt heavy. I heard her take a shaky breath. "I understand," she whispered, though her voice suggested otherwise. "Take care of yourself, Emily." I kept my tone gentle but firm. After we hung up, I sat there for a long while, staring at the phone. The conversation left me feeling hollow, but I knew it was necessary. Sarah's choices had consequences, and unfortunately, Emily was caught in the aftermath. After that run-in with Sarah at the park, seeing her there, fragile in that wheelchair, the air around us thick with what neither of us really wanted to say, I figured it was done between us. I told myself that was it. But a few days later, the first text from her pinged my phone. It was careful, almost like she was testing the waters. Something about thinking about me when she watched an old movie we had once seen together. It didn't hit me the way she probably hoped. I let it sit there unread for hours. I wasn't sure then if I'd even respond, and truthfully, I figured it was just a one-off message. Maybe some moment of nostalgia she'd gotten trapped in. By the next morning, though, there were 2 more messages waiting for me. Longer this time. It was a flood after that. Each text had this practiced urgency to them, like she'd been rehearsing what to say for God knows how long. "I'm sorry for what I did. I made such a fucking mistake," she wrote. And then, again, "You didn't deserve any of that, Michael. Please, let's talk." It was hard not to feel the weight of her desperation now, but it didn't budge the stone in my chest. Wherever she thought this was going, it wasn't. Hell, a year ago, if you told me Sarah would be groveling to me like this, I wouldn't have believed it. The woman I knew was always pragmatic, always one step ahead. She handled everything with a kind of cold calculation, which made her a damn good manager, probably, but it left her lacking in other places. When she left me mid-chemo, breaking up via text, while I was too weak to speak for myself, I could see it wasn't an emotional decision for her, just practical. Michael can't take care of me long term. That's what I'd become to her, a pros and cons list. But now Now I was staring at my phone more often than not, wondering how we got here. I responded to some of her messages, short, polite replies, nothing with substance, nothing that would open old wounds or give her hope. I appreciate the message, or no need to apologize anymore. I knew that's not what she wanted. She wanted everything back. She wanted to undo the damage she'd caused, but I had nothing left to give her. I wasn't going to air my grievances over text like she expected me to. And honestly, as the texts kept rolling in, sporadic ones about our failed plans for the forever home, or how Sophie missed our family dinners with Emily, I realized how easy it was to stay detached. The anger that used to bubble up whenever I thought about Sarah and what she'd done, the way she'd thrown away my support during her own illness, it was gone now. No rage, no longing. Her scrambling apologies and forced reminiscences felt hollow. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if she meant them, or if it was just that raw fear of loneliness driving her. Maybe she'd started to realize her friend Mark wasn't what she'd built him up to be. Maybe reality hit harder in that damn wheelchair. But again, not my problem. Then came the inevitable question over text. Do you think we could ever get back to what we had? I remember sitting in my truck, staring at the screen. It didn't even give me pause. The words flew out. I can't see myself taking care of someone so sick in the long term. I knew Sarah would know exactly what I meant the moment she read it. It was precise, cold, and utterly final. I was throwing her own words back in her face without even raising my voice. Hitting send felt good, surprisingly good. I had finished it, all of it, in 3 sentences. For a moment I waited. I half expected my phone to explode with more apologies, more excuses, more attempts to justify what couldn't be justified, but it stayed silent. I'd said everything I needed to. I didn't need to follow up, didn't need to twist the knife. In that moment, the tension that had wrapped itself around me for months loosened. I stared out through the windshield, watching the driveway fill with sunlight, and felt nothing, except a strange, unexpected sense of relief. I didn't feel the rage I expected, or even guilt. Just closure, I guess. It wasn't like I'd gone out of my way to crush her. I simply showed her the mirror, and what she saw in her own reflection was enough. From there, things moved in a different direction for me. I won't say I was healed or whole or whatever people like to call it after moments like this. I was still scraping myself off the floor in many ways, chemo still wearing me down at the edges, and learning to adjust to everything life threw at me with Sophie solely in mind. But I wasn't tethered to Sarah anymore. That's what mattered. The constant guilt I had carried over her felt non-existent. I realized that, in the time we had been together, I'd convinced myself that somehow I should have done more for her due to her illness. But fuck that. She played a part, I played mine. The rest, the downfall we crashed through, that was shared equally. Maybe more on her end, considering she was already planning her way out, even when I had been knee-deep in building our future. But I didn't need to explain that. The weight of what Sarah had done was already sinking into her, painfully slow. I kept moving forward. Sold off a few rental properties, kept the business running, even if I couldn't be as hands-on as before. I wasn't shy about delegating more, a hard thing to learn, but necessary when you had to juggle hospital visits along with client meetings. Sophie still cracked jokes about my ever-evolving hair situation thanks to the chemo, putting on this brave face. We were making things work, despite everything. A couple weeks later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sarah had fully sold off her property after that Leon fiasco, scraped together what she could, and was living in some lousy rental with Emily. It barely made a ripple in me. Not joy, not sympathy. Besides, she always liked things practical, right? Now she was living her practicality down to its bones. There was nothing more. No need for closure talks, no dramatic meet-up for me to rub salt into wounds that were already far too open. I wasn't the kind of guy to gloat or drag things out. I had made my point. Those renovations I'd poured my savings, time and sweat into. The grab bars, luxury-level bathroom upgrades for accessibility. Yeah, those were probably still sitting there, but they may as well be nothing to her now. All they ever really were in the end were reminders, remnants of a life she could have had, but threw away. One time, while sitting on my back porch, I watched Sophie and her friends laugh together in the yard, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what could have been. My mind stayed here, with what was left, and that was more than enough. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.